I love being surprised, and Peru exceeded expectations. I had no idea about Peru's dramatic changes in landscape, from the Amazon's lush tropical rainforest to the mountains near Machu Picchu to moonscape deserts that defy description. I knew nothing about the delicious food or about Peru's warm and friendly people. Of course, I'd heard of Peru's wonderful fine woolen textiles, but had never seen them or knew the differences between alpacas, baby alpacas, and vicuña wool. One of my very first shows was about climbing Machu Picchu, but it's been years since I listened to it. So while I knew my sister Terry and I were in for a treat on our 10-day tour with my affiliate Active Adventures, neither of us closely read the itinerary, trusting that Active would deliver a trip of a lifetime. She and I focused mainly on our training to climb Machu Picchu, which we considered the main event, not realizing there was so much more to this trip. And boy oh boy did Active deliver, and then some. I can't wait to share our amazing adventure, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today, I'm excited to report that I am recording from my new home in Tennessee. I moved here a couple of weeks ago and have been busy unpacking and decorating, as well as getting reacquainted with all of my stuff that's been stuck in storage for the last 3 years while I traveled about. While I love traveling full-time, I was feeling the urge to nest again. So, while I'm recording here, you might hear some songbirds in the background, and I do believe the recycle truck's on its way here. Oh, here it comes. As I'm recording this on my screen porch until I can set up a studio in the house. Before we head to Peru, I want to thank all of you for using my links to buy your adventure tours, travel insurance, and anything you buy on Amazon. Thanks to you, you are keeping this program ad-free, which I know we all appreciate. Links to my affiliates can be found on your podcast app description for each show and at activetraveladventures.com under resources. Plus, you can always email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and I'll send them to you. Now, let's head to Peru. Like many folks, climbing the mystical Machu Picchu was a bucket list dream trip for me. My plan last winter was to explore South America beginning in the summer. I was going to take the public bus to get to and fro. But last fall, while visiting my sister Terry, I worked a bit on the plan and realized quickly that my plan was totally unworkable, at least for my tolerances. I hadn't grasped how huge South America is. Places that look fairly close on the map, remember all maps are the same size, would be 40 or more hours away by bus. It was time for me to work out a plan B. I decided instead to choose just a few countries and fly in between these countries. I would first go to Peru, and then head to Chile and Argentina's Patagonia, and I also wanted to try to get to Antarctica. After that, if I still had energy and a little left in my budget, I was going to enjoy being back on the road, and I would visit Ecuador, Colombia, and Panama. But if I was too tired, I would just head back to the States. Now you can hear the chickens in my neighbor's yard. I would only buy one-way tickets to Peru and Chile, and then let the fates determine my path. Terry and I planned to spend a month together in Peru. The first couple of weeks we would be on our Active Adventures tour of Machu Picchu, the Sacred Valley, and the Amazon rainforest. Then she and I would continue exploring southern Peru on our own. Today we'll cover the Sacred Valley and trekking up Machu Picchu, and in the next episode I'll finish up in the Amazon rainforest and what Terry and I did exploring the rest of Peru and a little bit of Bolivia as well. So today we'll cover the most heavily touristed areas of Peru. And in the next show, I'll pick up where I left off and cover some of the adventures that she and I did independently of some other key attractions in Peru. But also, I'll tell you about our super fun excursion to the Uyuni Salt Flats of Bolivia, which was a mind-blowing experience and definitely a highlight of our adventure. As you may recall from previous episodes, I don't handle altitude that well, so I made a special plan for this trip. Since I would be spending much of the time at or above 12,000 feet above sea level, or about 4,000 meters, and I start feeling elevation somewhere around 8,000 feet. So I came up with a plan. I got a prescription for altitude from my doctor, which I took twice a day for those first 2 weeks. I made sure I drank plenty of water, as dehydration can make altitude worse. And importantly, I got to Cusco, which sits at 11,000 feet, or about 3,400 meters, and was our starting point a week earlier than our tour started, so that my body had plenty of time to acclimate. This is super important. 4 days minimum is recommended. On the day I got there, even though I slept on the long flight, I basically just took a ton of naps. Literally a ton of naps. After I checked into our Airbnb, I lied down for a nap. I'd get up for a short bit, be a little sleepy, I'd head back down for another nap. And this went on the entire day. I'll bet you I took more than a half a dozen naps that day. I didn't feel bad. I just felt exhausted with zero energy, and because my body was not used to having so much less oxygen. Terry and I had rented a darling, if quirky, apartment in Cusco. We think that the apartment was an add-on to the main house, as the refrigerator was in the dining room, which was across a quasi-outdoor sunroom/laundry room from the kitchen. I also had to cross that virtual outdoor covered room to use our one and only bathroom. Like I said, they just figured out how to make an apartment out of the roof of their home. So while the photos of the Airbnb we rented were true, not seeing the floor plan to look at, I had no idea it would be so convoluted. And I would end up staying in many such funky apartments in South America over the coming months. Cusco is at the center of 4 roads that represent the regions of the sun. In fact, all cities are lined up exactly east and west with the sun. In Quechuan, the local dialect, an east-west river is considered holy. Cusco was the capital of the Inca Empire. Here are some notable interesting things about the Incans. The nobles' daughters went to the house of virgins to get educated for them to become priestesses. Black is the preferred color for llamas and alpaca sacrifices. You will also see mostly black cats and dogs because it's the most pure color. On palaces, they would carve a snake, as snakes were a symbol of wisdom. The Spanish Catholic priests thought the snakes meant demons, and therefore thought that they worshipped demons, so this is how they justified destroying their places of worship. Another important animal is the mighty condor. 8 days after death, the condor takes the soul to the heavens. The first animal to enter the house after death informs the family that the soul made it to heaven. After a few days exploring charming and historical Cusco on our own, it was time to meet our group. At the introductions, I could tell that I would like everybody in our group. Kim was here to cross off a bucket list trip for her 60th birthday, and to celebrate, friends Janet, Annie, and Greg joined her. Jessica and Kevin, as well as their friend Dan, also came together. And then there was Peter, who came on his own, and finally Terry and I traveling together. I was worried at first that the 2 main groups would be cliquey, but that gratefully was never an issue, and everybody mixed and got along great. The first day of any active tour is more of a get-to-know-everyone day, and there's usually an activity that allows the guide, our wonderful Wilson in this case, to assess his group and their abilities. We hiked up to Saxy Woman, commonly referred to as Sexy Woman for ease of pronunciation, at the top of a large hill that overlooks Cusco, timing the hike to catch the sunset. The Incas, who ruled this area in the 15th century until they were conquered by the Spaniards, were remarkable stoneworkers and astronomers. Somehow, and there is still debate as to how, the Incas managed to manipulate ginormous, and I'm talking about larger than human-sized stone blocks into walls where the stones fit so tightly, and this is without mortar, mind you, they are so tightly fitted that you can't slide a knife between them. That's how tight they are. They were also designed to withstand earthquakes. The stones will rattle a bit and then settle back into place. It's absolutely amazing. And the Incas did so without iron tools, the wheel, or pack animals. All they have is llamas, and they can only carry about 40 kilos or less than 100 pounds, so they're not even strong enough to carry a man, making them useless to move these boulders. Another puzzle is, the stonework is from volcanic stone, and the nearest volcano is 25 kilometers away, up and down mountains, making it seem impractical to use. And after more than 500 years, the Incan structures remain, while the Spaniards' buildings have often crumbled from earthquakes. Not only are the stones perfectly placed, at Sacsayhuaman, the walls were once 90 feet high, and they are aligned perfectly with the sun, which, as you recall, they worshipped. And as with many civilizations, over time, the upper levels of these stones were repurposed to build the city of Cusco. Our visit was both informative and beautiful as we looked down on the bustling city below and a tall glacier-covered mountain in the distance. After a delicious restaurant dinner, we tucked in early so we'd be fresh for our bike ride in the morning. The Sacred Valley. We met early in the morning and headed to check out the market before our bike ride. One aisle in the San Pedro market features a variety of potatoes, one of Peru's most important crops. They have over 1,000 varieties of potatoes. Someone even told me over 3,000. Potatoes get their own aisle in this market. One way a potential mother-in-law can see if a woman's going to be a good wife for her son is to see if she can peel a potato without breaking the peel. I didn't think I'd ever been able to find a husband. Another staple food is quinoa, which we often had to boost fresh soups and even as a morning porridge. The porridge looked funny, but it tasted good. You'll see quinoa power bars, candies, and as a main ingredient in many meals. And while not necessarily the national drink, one of the most popular drinks is a purple corn drink called chicha morada. It is seasoned with cinnamon and lemon juice along with other spices, and it tastes pretty good. While walking around the city, Wilson introduced us to some common street food and drink. One was a herbal mixture concocted in a 5-gallon bucket. The others were sweets. It helps to have a local show you what to try, as they know where the good places are and what a tourist can safely try. At one stop, Wilson showed us an herbal potion that helps you deal with altitude, so I bought a bottle. You sniff it, it's pleasant enough, and it's supposed to help you feel better. One of the most striking images you see is the women dressed in the traditional garb. They will start with a wide brim hat to protect from the sun as you're quite high here, and then they'll add a wool woven skirt topped with a long-sleeved wool shirt, sometimes a vest, but always a colorful shawl tied around their shoulders. Tucked in the back of the shawl might be a baby, maybe some produce, their regular shopping, or anything else they want to carry. They'll wear long socks and flat, sturdy shoes for the many cobbled and uneven streets and walkways. Their long black hair is neatly tied into 1 or 2 braids hanging down the back. Men sometimes still dress in charming traditional clothes, but it's more often the women you'll see in the national dress. And by that, I mean women of all ages, from the children to the old ladies. When we were driving one day, we saw a woman out in fields with a pickaxe in her national dress. One thing you don't see a lot of is power equipment like tractors. Sadly, most labor is still done by hand, and it's back-breaking work. In front of one stall, a woman was swishing water around her stand using a handful of brush, kind of like a stickless broom, and I thought she was cleaning the pavement, but Wilson said she was brushing away the bad luck so that she would sell more that day. Catholicism may have been introduced here by the Spanish, but the locals have merged their traditional customs and superstitions with the church, and it appears that the old ways have top placement. Pachamama, or Mother Earth, appears on par or maybe a little higher esteem than the Virgin Mary. Before you eat or drink anything around here, you pour or offer a bit on the ground to Pachamama in much the same way that I ask for a blessing before I eat. One interesting thing that we learned that there are more women than men police, as women are thought to be less likely to take a bribe. After exploring this intriguing market, we hopped in a van and headed to the Sacred Valley, a fertile region once the heart of the Inca Empire. Our first stop is at a local bakery where we're treated to a fabulous caramel with chocolate bits sweet community bread called chuta. These loaves are at least a foot wide. You break off a piece and share it among the group. The bread is cooked in a massive stone oven where the dough is placed on 10-foot paddles so it can be safely deposited deep in the oven for baking. It tasted heavenly. Bakers start at 2 a.m. each day so they can get it to the market by 4. Then, further up the road, Wilson wants to show us another local custom. And I gotta say, this is a big reason why I'm now a firm believer in hiring a guide, while at the same time sticking with small groups so you get the personal touch. Already on this trip, I've learned all sorts of things about the culture that I would have been clueless about otherwise. We get out of the van next to a row of florists. Then Wilson instructs us, watch the vendors selling bunches of flowers, race up to the cars that enter the street. This is the street that leads to the area's biggest church, and anyone who has a new to them car, when they enter the street, will buy and decorate their car with flowers and then head to the church to ask for a blessing for their new car. After negotiating prices, the driver chooses his flower bunch, attaches the flowers to the dash and sides for his procession up to the church. Next, it's time for our bike ride through the Sacred Valley. As we ride, we can see all the beautiful terraces that line the Andes Mountains. The Incas were masters, not just with stonework, but also in taming and controlling irrigation to farm these beautiful rugged hills. It was very impressive, and I can't even imagine the work involved in building them. And I should add that this labor is done by citizens and not slaves. Periodically, Wilson stops us to let us taste some of the fruits and leaves we pass along the route. Again, I would have zipped right by and have no idea. Many of the trees we see and smell are eucalyptus, an introduced species that appears to adapt to this climate quite well. Maybe a tad invasive. We finish our ride in the charming town of Pisac, well known for its artisan market. I have zero room in my luggage, so I can only admire the woolens, regretting that I had to pack for such diverse climates for this 4-month trip. Souvenirs are out of the question. I see a lot I'd love to buy. We would be learning a lot about how to determine the quality of wool in the next couple of weeks. After our ride, it's time to take a steep hike to visit the Pisac ruins. When we arrive at the top, we are treated to a spectacular view of the Andes and the Sacred Valley. It is believed that this fortress area was developed by the Incas as a place to relax outside the city and to hold religious ceremonies. Then Wilson points to some holes or small round caves across the way. Here is where the Incas buried their dead. Sadly, they're empty now, ransacked by treasure hunters. From the top looking out, Wilson pulls out a Peruvian flute and plays a haunting song for us, highlighting the sacred nature of this place. When we complete our hike, it's time for lunch and our van pulls over to a beautiful overlook. I think we're going to have a picnic here. Instead, we're told to cross the street and head to a large wedding-like tent. Inside is a beautifully appointed table set just for us. What follows is an outstanding gourmet meal. I'll share pictures on the website. Then, when we think it can't get any better, we learn that Donato, the chef of this feast, is going to be our chef for our Machu Picchu climb. It sure doesn't look like we'll be eating nasty backpacker food on that trek. Heading back to town, we stop once more to learn about other critters from the camel family that live here: llamas, alpacas, and vicuñas, the latter of which has the softest wool on earth. Check this out. Vicuña hair is so fine that it takes 16 of them to fill the width of a human hair. And you can only shear the belly of the vicuña, so that's all you can get the wool from, is just the belly, and they're teeny compared to the others. So it takes the wool of a ton of animals to create even a scarf. That's why it's the most expensive of the wools. A scarf could be hundreds of dollars. The next fine wool is the baby alpaca, then the adult alpaca. Llamas are used as beasts of burden and not for wool. And like I mentioned, they can carry just under 100 pounds, or about 40 kilos. There's one other camel-eyed critter, the guanaco, but I won't meet one of them until I go to Patagonia. There are piles of long-cut grass we can pick up and feed the animals, which is fun. They have all sorts of varieties of alpacas and llamas we can check out. One of my favorite is the Bob Marley of alpacas. It has this dreadlock-looking fur. I pet him, and he was as soft as it can be. Of course, I'll have some photos and videos at activetraveladventures.com, so be sure to check it out. Then we got to see a demonstration of how the women weave these fine wools and the plants they use as natural dyes. Afterwards, we heard a brief talk about how to determine the quality of wool and weavings. It was very informative and super cool. We had a great introduction to Peru and its culture today, but I need to get some rest as tomorrow we start our Machu Picchu climb along the Inca Trail. Machu Picchu means old mountains, and the locals pronounce it Pictu, because Machu Picchu, the way Westerners say it, means old pee-pee. Machu Picchu was designed by superior architects, astronomers, and engineers. Fortunately, the Spanish never found it, so it never got destroyed. When we think of the Inca Trail, we're talking about the 4-day trek to Machu Picchu, a 15th century citadel that was built around 1450 and abandoned a century later before the Spanish arrived. Europeans didn't discover the site until the 19th century. Machu Picchu was built in classic Inca style with dry polished stones. Its 3 primary structures are the Intihuatana, the Temple of the Sun, and the Room of the 3 Windows. Most of the outlying buildings have been reconstructed in order to give visitors a better view of how they originally appeared. By the mid-1970s, most of the restoration was complete. In 1981, Machu Picchu was declared a Peruvian Historic Sanctuary, and in 1983, it was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In 2007, it was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Like many hikers, climbing Machu Picchu has been on the bucket list, and I couldn't wait to hike it. They only allow 500 people per day to use the trail, and 300 of them are the superhuman porters. That leaves just 200 permits for us hikers. I booked early with Active Adventures so I could get an Inca Trail permit. But there's another alternative trail called the Lares Trail, which is a little shorter and somewhat less difficulty, but it has the added appeal of some more cultural interaction with locals, and in the case of Active's tour, a visit to a local school. Peter in our group opted for this tour, and he absolutely loved it. The school children sang for him during his visit, and he just loved meeting and chatting through Wilson with them. We leave bright and early to hit the park, but do take a pit stop en route for some coffee and snack in a cute town called Ollantay, which featured the typical central square. I do believe our little group overwhelmed the poor old woman at the small cafe we chose, and our messed up orders gave us a lot of laughs. Eventually we made it to the park to check in. Today we'll hike just over 7 miles, about 12 kilometers, up 1,300 feet elevation, and camp at 9,800 elevation. I mentioned the porters, who are the heroes of the journey. While they carefully make sure none carries more than 50 pounds, I think it was, these guys and gals, I might mention, literally run down the trail. No sooner have you finished your meal than the camp is torn down and they race off to the next station, whether it's to the lunch tent or a campsite for the end of the day. For our group of 10 hikers and 2 guides, we have 18 porters. Whenever you arrive at your next stop, everything is set up and ready for you. They not only carry all the food and often water, but the kitchen, the mess tent, plus 2 bathroom tents, and all the hikers and porter tents, sleeping gear, night clothes, and toiletries. They are remarkable. All we have to carry is our day pack with water and snacks and layers, including a puffy jacket and a rain jacket. And when you arrive at camp, all the porters are lined up clapping and cheering your arrival. I have to admit, it actually makes you feel like a rock star and that you've actually accomplished something of note that day. When in actuality, it's us hikers who should be lining up cheering the porters, which we do as they race by us on the trail with a special whoop whoop to our active porters. The trail is often rocky with rock stairs, so you'll want to wear proper hiking boots. Also, make sure you have nice cushioned insoles that'll nest your feet against the pounding against the stone. I prefer using poles, which can especially be a knee saver on the downhills. They make you put rounded rubber tips so you don't damage the steps with your metal tips. You can buy some from the vendors right before you enter the park should you forget. There are several tiny clusters of homes near the start of the trail, and we pass women with heavy loads on their backs as they bring provisions home. With even heavier loads, some use donkeys. Along the path we see handmade mud bricks drying in the sun. Sometimes we pass ruins of Inca villages. And surprisingly, at least for a bit, there is the occasional drink shack where you can buy a soda or use the toilet. Before long, we leave civilization. We have 2 guides, Wilson went with Peter on the Larius Trail, so we have Rolfie in the front and Sylvie working sweep in the back. Much of the first day was hiking along a pretty stream, but that wasn't the only water. Towards the end of our hike, it started to rain. Before long, we came to a tent where the porters had some tea to help us warm up. Then we headed to our already set up tents to clean up. The porters then brought each of us a bucket of warm water, which was an unexpected treat. It was nice to get properly clean, not something I'm used to when I backpack, that's for sure. We had dinner in the mess tent, complete with tablecloth and real silverware. For an appetizer, we had a stuffed avocado, and for an entree, a stuffed salmon, chopped cucumber salad, and a rice and pea pilaf, all beautifully presented. With all meals, you can add some spicy pico de gallo that can jazz things up to your taste levels. We were going to eat very well on this tour. After dinner, I crashed. Tomorrow is supposed to be the hardest day. We would be climbing Dead Woman's Pass. Today, we hiked just over 7 miles, or 12 kilometers, with 1,300 or 400 meter elevation gain. We'd be sleeping at almost 10,000 elevation, and so far I'm feeling pretty good. I think coming early to acclimatize, plus the pills and training have paid off. Our wake-up call was a porter bringing us a cup of tea. How nice is that? Que papaya. That's the locals' way of saying, this is wonderful. Que papaya is part of my vernacular now. The sun was shining and we soon saw a peak covered in snow. The temperature was comfortable, but we were off in our puffy jacket, especially when just chilling around the camper during meals. Breakfast was a feast, something I'd be getting used to. There was always enough variety so you could find something to satisfy you. Bar none, every meal was delicious and healthy, and there's plenty of it. And today we needed to tank up for our most challenging day, climbing Dead Woman's Pass with an altitude of 14,435 feet or 4,400 meters. That includes our elevation gain of over 3,000 feet or over 900 meters, and this is at low oxygen levels. Along the trail at this elevation, I was surprised at how many wildflowers we saw, including clusters of wild orchids and other exotic blooms. And all the while, the trail is surrounded by towering mountains, with the upper clouds giving them a cool, moody look. I knew the Inca Trail was a historic trail, but I was happy to see it was also quite a pretty trail. At lunchtime, with Dead Woman's Pass still to summit, we stopped for lunch at this stunning camp surrounded by jagged peaks that made you want to pinch yourself. After a hearty meal, it was back on the trail to complete our climb. I won't lie, it was a tough climb to the pass, and you can definitely feel the lack of oxygen in the air when you're up that high. But if you slowly plod along, you will eventually get to the top and be rewarded with a striking 360-degree view, making the climb worth it. Rear guide Salvi was a hero and carried not only his bigger pack, but 4 of the hikers' day packs. Some of the gals teased that without Salvi and his encouragement, they never would have made it. While I think they might be exaggerating, he had his own fan club after that day. The way down is over cobbled steps paved by the Incans over 500 years ago as we headed to the Pacamaya Valley to tonight's camp. For some, the knees took a beating on the steps down. Another reason I strongly recommend bringing hiking poles to help distribute the stress and the weight. Even though we only hiked about 7 miles, it was definitely a tough 7 miles, and we were all grateful to see our night's camp and to realize we'd conquered the most difficult section of the Inca Trail. While it was exciting to climb Dead Woman's Pass, I would have to say the next day was my personal favorite. We were slowly coming downhill and entering increasingly verdant cloud forests while occasionally passing by Inca fortresses left to the winds. It was a bit surreal. There was one section, my absolute favorite, which was like a spiral staircase winding down through the jungle. It was stunning. Our hike today was just over 7 miles with 2624 elevation gain, which felt easy peasy after yesterday's major ascent. One thing I thought was cool is that you could randomly see a llama munching on the grass. Out this far from civilization, I'm pretty sure they were wild. They were used to people and would let you get close to them to take a photo as they munched on the grass. There were quite a few hanging around an Inca ruin, making it particularly photogenic. Our campsite that night was not our favorite. I think it's because of the rugged terrain. The only option was to cram our tents super close to each other. It doesn't really make a difference, as usually as soon as you finish dinner, you brush your teeth and go to bed, sleeping like the dead. That night, since we would not see our porters at the end, we had a farewell dinner to celebrate them and to give them their well-deserved tip. These folks work incredibly hard and must have supersized lungs. Truly, they would run down the trail burdened with 50 pounds of gear on their back. But it was very important to them that they had the camp set up and ready for us so they could greet us with their cheers and claps as we arrived. Somehow, they managed to bake a celebratory cake topped with sliced kiwi and a berry glaze. It was yummy. In addition to the hot water to wash ourselves, that night, since it would be cold, we were also given an old-fashioned hot water bottle to put in our sleeping bag to keep us warm. They did this for us in Bhutan as well, and it's amazing how those bottles, along with our body heat, can retain that heat throughout the night. It makes for a very comfortable sleep. At breakfast, we got pancakes decorated with Peru and mountains and drizzled chocolate. I wolfed it down and was eager to get back on the trail. Today, we'd make it to Machu Picchu at last. First, though, we came to a super nice old Incan fortification that I thought was in great shape. All the terraces, and there were a lot of them, were in excellent condition, and the buildings were intact except for the rotted-away thatched roofs. It was quite impressive. Best of all, we had the view to ourselves. And I should mention that outside of seeing porters, we only saw other hikers at the lunch camps, so it always seemed like we had the trail in these mountains to ourselves, which I loved. Then we got really excited. Up ahead was a sign. We were getting closer to civilization, and it said we had just 6 kilometers to walk to Machu Picchu, or a little over 3.5 miles. We had to go through a checkpoint like we did at the start. I guess that's how they keep track of the people. And then it wasn't long before we reached the Sun Gate, or Inti Punco, another Incan astrological site. On the solstice, the sun goes through the stone gate precisely. It's quite something. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't cooperating with us. It was very cloudy and misty, and while we knew Machu Picchu should be visible from here, we weren't able to see it. But you know what? I didn't care. This truly was a case of the journey being more important than the endpoint. Then, for the briefest of 60 seconds, the clouds parted enough for us to see Machu Picchu down below before getting enveloped once more by the clouds. Machu Picchu itself is very touristy, and for me it was actually a bit anticlimactic. I do believe I would have loved stopping at the Sun Gate and then turning around and walking back. Not that they let you do it, of course, but I think that actually in hindsight would have been my preference. Terry and I left our 3 cocoa leaves under a small rock on one of the walls to thank Pachamama for our safe travels. Terry and I learned about this Pachamama tradition on 2 training hikes we did in Cusco prior to our Machu Picchu trek, and I'll explain more about that in our next episode. When we eventually made it down to Machu Picchu, it was definitely quite impressive, but after 4 days in the woods, seeing all the tourists was jarring. They were dressed all nicely while we were in our stinky 4-day-old hiking clothes and knotty hair. You see, you can also get to Machu Picchu by bus. It seemed like cheating to me. At Machu Picchu, they've rented over 30% of the wall, so you can see what it was like. It's like a small city and thought to be the estate of a former Incan emperor. About 750 lived there full time. The main points of interest are the Intihuatana, basically a stone clock, the Temple of the Sun, and the Room of the 3 Windows. There are no written records, so archaeologists try to piece together things with whatever clues they have available. It was only used a little over 100 years, from 1420 to around 1532, and was abandoned before the Spanish conquest. And as mentioned, it wasn't discovered by the Spanish, indeed by Westerners at all, until the 19th century, and was not on the map until American historian and explorer Hiram Bingham was taken there by a local villager in 1911. He was the one to bring the find to an international attention. Like I said, it's now considered one of the new 7 wonders of the world. It has become an immensely popular historic site to visit. If you want to hike the Inca or Laura's Trail, you need to make arrangements with a tour company. You must go with a guide. And I certainly recommend my affiliate Active Adventures and book it as far in advance as possible. And don't forget, my listeners get $200 off any Active Adventures tour with the promo code ATA200. If you forget, just email me and I'll send it to you, as they don't let me publish it on the website. It's only for my listeners. Again, that's promo code is ATA200, ATA200, to save $200 off of all bookings. As we arrived at the site, we were welcomed by Wilson and Peter, who arrived much earlier before the tourist bus arrived. I have to admit to some jealousy there. But our group was finally back together. Peter had had a wonderful adventure on his own, with the highlight being the school children. After spending a couple hours touring Machu Picchu, we were starving and headed to town for a massive buffet meal. This restaurant must have had 50 feet of options, including expensive stuff, and we wolfed it all down along with an adult beverage or 2. Some musicians were playing in the corner, and my sister Terry, who is an avid music fan, went up to ask them what was that dangling brown instrument used for percussion, kind of like a tambourine. They said it was nails. Sure didn't look like nails, so we assumed something got lost in translation. Then we asked Wilson, who laughed and explained that the instrument was indeed made out of nails. Toenails, not metal building nails. They're hollowed out and dried pig foot nails. It made a pleasant wooden sound when they hit each other. Terry ended up buying a set along with the popular Peruvian flute that you commonly hear in Peru. Here's a funny story. Everywhere we went, restaurant-wise I should clarify, the background music, sometime during the course of our visit, played Simon & Garfunkel's I'd Rather Be a Hammer Than a Nail, but they would do it instrumentally with the Peruvian flute. Terry and I were thinking, they must really like that song. We heard it dozens of times during our month in Peru. Well, it turns out that Simon & Garfunkel used the tune of the Peruvian hit The Condor Pass and put their own lyrics to it, so we were just hearing popular Peruvian music. That ended up becoming our theme song of Peru. Excuse my singing, it's horrible. After lunch, we had a couple hours to explore the cute Machu Picchu base town of Aguas Calientes, hot water, before taking the train back to Cusco. Instead of shopping, and there were lots of cute handicraft boutiques to shop in, we opted to grab a beer and sit on a bench and just people watch until it was time to meet up with the group again. The following day would be a free day in Cusco before we headed to the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, which was just as exciting as Machu Picchu, especially when we got to see hundreds of macaws one morning. I'm going to stop here for part 1 and finish up my Active Adventures tour in part 2, as well as tell you about some of the other fun things Terry and I did on our own 2 weeks in Peru. It was a fantastic trip. And if you've got Machu Picchu fever in the meantime, don't forget to check out episode number 14. I'll put a link in the show notes, so just scroll down if you're on your phone, and you'll see a link there, or just go to the website and type in Machu Picchu in the search bar. I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of my Machu Picchu adventure. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!